here at Salt in My Coffee. Thanks so much for coming back. A few of you have written me really sweet emails and comments wondering why I haven't been on YouTube for a while. And there's a few different reasons. One really big one is that my neighbors invited a commercial beekeeper to put 1.5 million bees, honeybees, right next to my home. And so it has been quite a bee-full summer, not in a good way. The kids and I have been stung a lot of times. It's been really, really tricky, actually. Bees everywhere. It's hard to hang laundry without getting stung. I've been harvesting zucchini at 8 o'clock at night just to not get stung. But this is a different story for another time. I actually really do want to talk about that and tell you a little bit about my saga with living next to more than 30 beehives. And yeah, that's been tricky. So all that said, the weather's gotten a little bit cooler. It isn't so much of a Beemageddon situation right now. And I really am looking forward to jumping back into this YouTube channel and just doing homestead life with y'all. Now, an interesting thing happened to me a couple weeks ago, and I've been wanting to talk about it. And that is, I stopped and picked up a roadkill deer and butchered it out for my freezer. This was the first time I've done this. It's something that I've been thinking about wanting to do for a long time. And the opportunity just landed figuratively and literally right in front of me on my way to drop the kids off for school the other day. This gorgeous young button buck had just been felled right in front of me. It was one of those things where you stop, and for anybody who has worked on butchering out meat of any kind, you can really tell when something has just been killed. And so I dropped my kids off, came back, and nobody had grabbed this deer. Took a look at it and realized, my gosh, this just happened like minutes ago. I am not going to let this absolutely gorgeous life go to waste. And so I've never done it before, but I'm going to put this deer in my freezer. Let's figure out how to do it. And I think roadkill gets a really bad name, even in homesteading circles, even among people who raise animals for meat, who are not squeamish or queasy, and who really have a sense of the value of a life and what that means to be a good steward of a life that has lived well, that has eaten grass and has come to an end, and not making any, not letting that go to waste. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit about what I learned from this experience. I would do this again in a heartbeat. It was great. Basically what I did was I actually drove down the road until I had cell signal, because where this deer was, I didn't have a great connection, and was able to reach the Maine Fish and Wildlife Department, and they told me, absolutely, you can go ahead and pick up that deer. They took a note of what road and what town, where that deer was located, where my home was, and all they did was they sent out an officer to my home to meet me there with the deer. They let me know that I should not begin butchering it until after I had a tag. And the officer drove out here to the house, met me with the deer, inspected it to make sure that, yes, indeed, this was not a deer that was felled from hunting. This was roadkill. Put a tag on that deer, said a few encouraging words to me, and wished me well. And then there I was with my beautiful young buck and a freezer just waiting for it. And so this happened on a morning when I had exactly 2 hours before I needed to turn around, leave the house, and go off to an appointment, not smelling like a butcher shop. You don't want to show up at a doctor's appointment smelling like you've been working at a butcher counter all morning. And so, you know what? It was fine. It went great. I was able to get that deer totally cleaned. And what I did was got it, skinned, cleaned out, and quartered, and then put it on ice in a big cooler and let that sit until I had a chance to get it all portioned and in freezer sealed packages for the freezer. All told, between the 2 hours that I spent that morning and the 1 hour that it took me getting everything packaged for the freezer and weighing it out the next day, It was 3 hours for more than 40 absolutely gorgeous pounds of meat. And I'll tell you, I was generous with my dog. Anything that was damaged, that had, you know, really seen a lot of impact, that had some bruising to it. This is not that 40 pounds of beautiful meat that went in my freezer. That's on top of it. And so 40 perfect pounds, an absolutely gorgeous pelt, and lots of good experience. And you know, it's great meat. I had a chance to cook up one of the roasts when my parents came over several days later. One of the best, tenderest, most flavorful roasts that I've ever cooked in my life. And I'm just excited to cook my way through the rest of that 40 pounds. So a good experience all the way around. But I did learn a few things. And, you know, I want to encourage any of you who maybe have been thinking about stopping for roadkill but have been shamed out of it or have felt really hesitant about this. There's a few things I wish I knew ahead of time, and that's my goal to share with you today. I think there are a lot of things you might not know that you need, or think you need and you don't. And so that's my goal, is let's start with the things you actually do need and you might want to be prepared for if you're thinking that you might want to stop and pick up a roadkill deer. Now, I actually printed myself out a list because I've been thinking about this for a few days and I don't want to forget anything. Now, the biggest thing that you're going to need, and this does depend on the state. Here in Maine is a state where you absolutely can pick up roadkill deer. To my understanding, there's not a limit on the number that you can take, but you do need to get that deer inspected and you need to get an official tag on it. Now, that tag is going to look like this. They come out, they put their information on it, they wrap it around the leg of the deer, and you need to keep this with you until every bit of meat is gone. And so, you know, this is staying right in my freezer along with all of that packaged meat. And so basically, I think one great way to be prepared ahead of time with this is it's a lot easier here in Maine. If a lot of rural places, you might not have the most amazing cell signal. It is a lot easier to dial a phone number that you've got already stored in your phone than it is to type something into the search bar on your phone while you're roaming, try to pull up that number for the Fish and Game Department, and call while you're in a place where you've got maybe one bar of service. One thing you could do ahead of time is look up the right number for your Fish and Game Department. Actually give them a call ahead of time and make sure that's the most convenient direct number to call if you want to harvest a roadkill deer. Program that number into your phone so that all you have to do is, it's great to have good neighbors. Those are not the bee neighbors. Program that number into your phone, so all you have to do is dial it up before you go ahead and grab that deer. And yeah, that makes it a little bit easier in an area where you might not have much cell signal. Makes it a little bit easier to call and make arrangements to either be met on the road by someone with that tag or be met back at your house with that tag. So that's something you're going to need. You're going to need the official roadkill tag. A sharp knife. Honestly, Lord knows I have done some work with meat with very dull knives over the years, and it's not fun. You don't want to be butchering out a big old deer with a dull knife. Keep your knives sharp. That's one way that you can just be prepared ahead of time. Always know that you've got at least one multi-purpose, really good sharp knife. It doesn't need to be, you know, knives in all sizes, and that's something I'll talk about later. But you do need a good sharp knife to be able to skin out that deer and make use of the pelt, and to be able to really do justice to the carcass. Having a sharp knife is going to make your day so much easier, and it's going to make everything go a lot faster. You need some room in the freezer. Those 40 pounds or however many it ends up being need to go somewhere. So unless you have friends that are clamoring for deer meat and you're looking to share, make sure that you're staying on top of your freezer and that you've got room to put a deer in the freezer. You're going to need plenty of bags or plastic wrap for this deer. You need a way of packaging it so that it's not going to get freezer burned, because you're not going to just be living on venison. I mean, even if it's great venison like this one, you're probably not going to be eating it at every meal until it's gone. You might want this to last for a few months. And so make sure that you have some packaging that's going to allow you to package this in such a way that it doesn't get freezer burned. You don't need a vacuum sealer like I have, but honestly, even like a $45 vacuum sealer, I know that's a lot. For a lot of you, that's a lot. For me, that's a lot. But wow, when you consider how much money a vacuum sealer can save in terms of preserving quality meat for a long time, I actually think that's a really good investment if you can, but you don't need it. But you do need a good way of packaging that meat and getting it in your freezer. So be prepared with plenty of bags on hand. Time. You're gonna need at least an hour, and you're gonna need it right away. You didn't shoot this deer, and so you don't know what kind of damage has happened inside. You don't know, unless you watched it happen, you don't know exactly how long this deer has been dead. You don't know whether the stomach is ruptured inside. You're gonna wanna get this deer cleaned and hanging and, get it butchered out and dressed right away. And so you're probably gonna need at least an hour to do that. I know some of you could butcher a deer in your sleep and you don't need an hour. I needed a good solid hour to be able to get that deer cleaned and skin it. It takes some time. And so if you don't have at least an hour right away, maybe this isn't the day to pick up that deer. You need at least a little bit of time to be able to get this deer. You're not going to just leave it hanging the way you might a little bit longer if you'd shot it in the field. Running water. I know that people have been butchering out meat for ages, time immemorial. We didn't always have hoses with fresh running water, but that one kind of goes without saying. I was really thankful for a hose that ran down to the apple tree where I hung up the deer, making sure you've got a setup that's easily available. It's not like you've always got to keep the hose run out where you're going to hang up the deer if you happen to stop and get one. But knowing you've got that hose, knowing you've got fresh running water and a plan, if you do come home with a roadkill deer, that is definitely helpful. Now, those are the things you really kind of need to have if you're planning to stop and pick up a roadkill deer if you see one. Let's talk about some things that are really helpful to have and that either I'm really glad to have or I wish I had had. A huge cooler with plenty of ice. This was something I'm really thankful. I have a huge cooler. I did not have time to totally get that deer in the freezer all portioned out into meal-sized amounts that first day. And so it was great to be able to quarter the deer once it was totally dressed and cleaned, get it on ice in that cooler, and know it was okay for that to sit for some hours until I could come back, get everything measured, jointed out, do a really good job of packaging that for the freezer. Having a really big cooler gives you some leeway that you wouldn't have otherwise. More than one sharp knife. Now, as luck would have it, my dad happened to have his sharpening tool with him and sharpened my most commonly used multi-purpose knife with just a few extra minutes that he had during a visit a couple of weekends before this. I had one really good, really sharp knife that I did from start to finish this whole project with the exception of cutting through the really heavy, like cutting through the neck and the backbone, some of those really heavy cuts that I needed a giant cleaver that I almost never use and that does stay sharp. I did every bit of this butchering job with that one really sharp knife. It was not that sharp by the time I was done with it, I'll tell you, but I was really thankful for it. That said, it would be helpful to be able to use a little bit of a bigger knife for some things, a smaller knife for other things. Keep your knives sharp. It's definitely just a good practice. It speeds up everything. It's a lot safer to work with a sharp knife. It's a lot more fun to work with a sharp knife. A vacuum sealer, I've already mentioned. You don't need one, but gosh, I am so thankful for mine, and I use it all the time. I use it for so many things that it's on my counter being used more days than not. And certainly for a job like putting a deer in the freezer, I am so thankful for it. I think it's a really helpful investment if it's one that you can make. But again, it's not something that you need. So in the category of great to have, really thankful I have one, But do you need one? No, you can figure this out. Another thing that's helpful but not necessary is some knowledge of butchering animals. Up until this, I had never butchered out a deer. I had butchered out a sheep. I've butchered out a heck of a lot of chickens. I've butchered out rabbits, quite a few other things. So I have some sense of butchering things. Do you need to be an expert? No. Do you ever need to have butchered anything before to figure this out? Also no. You can do this. There are YouTube videos, and even if you don't watch a YouTube video, you cook. You know, if you're somebody who is watching this thinking, I might like to stop and pick up a deer and put it in my freezer, chances are you cook from scratch, okay? You know what a roast is. You know what a joint is. You have some sense of the kind of pieces of meat that you cook. You know what the ribs are. Once you start getting into it, you're gonna recognize things. You can go for it. It's helpful to have some knowledge of that. Doesn't hurt to get a copy of something like the River Cottage Cookbook, which shows all the cuts and is really helpful for this type of cooking. But again, if you've never butchered anything before and you don't have time to go through an hour-long YouTube video doing it step by step, you're gonna be fine. You know what? Make sure that meat gets clean, gets in the freezer, and you're gonna figure it out. You'll do it justice. A rope or a chain for hanging the deer. You wanna know what I hauled up that deer with? My dog's leash, her long slip lead. That's what I had handy. I didn't see a rope nearby. I ended up finding a chain afterwards that I was able to pull up the other side and kind of stretch it out, and it worked fine. I did a great job hanging it, honestly. It worked out okay, but you know, it would have been easier having plenty of rope and a plan ahead of time. So making sure you have those things on hand ahead of time is something that you can do to make life a little easier for yourself if you are blessed with a roadkill deer in front of you on the road. Some kind of motorized way of hauling up that deer. Okay, so this just happened to happen when I had a flat tire on my lawnmower, and it's in such a place I wasn't going to go driving my car down behind my apple tree in the backyard, and so I did not have a motorized way of hauling up this deer, and a deer can be heavier than you think. Now I am not saying that this deer is heavier than I am, but there definitely was a point at which I found myself hanging from one end of the rope in the air while that deer was still on the ground on the other side of an apple branch. What I ended up doing was pulling over my gorilla cart, filling it with heavy rocks so that it weighed a couple 100 pounds, attaching the other end of the long heavy-duty leash to the gorilla cart and aiming it downhill. And then I was out there hoisting up that deer into the air while kicking my gorilla cart downhill so that I could use it as a counterweight and get gravity working for me to hoist that deer up into the air. And you know what? It worked. What would have been a lot easier is not having a flat tire on my lawnmower and being able to just haul it up. Would have been easier. Not necessary. Helpful to have. Okay, last category. Let's talk about some things you just don't need. You don't need all day, okay? It does not have to take you hours and hours to put a roadkill deer in the freezer. I don't know what I'm doing, and I think I did a great job, and it took me 3 hours for more than 40 pounds of perfect grass-fed, beautiful meat. And if I did this every day, it wouldn't have taken that long. You don't need to set aside 8 hours to just deal with a deer. You can fit this into your day. If you've got, like in my situation, I had 2 hours and then I had 1 hour. If you've got some blocks of time where you can work on this, I think almost anybody who knows how to butcher an animal of some kind, even if it's not a deer, almost anybody who really cooks from scratch could probably do this job in 3 hours. I am not exceptional. You don't need all day, okay? It's not gonna take you hours and hours and hours to deal with this. You do need some free time, and you need to be able to really dedicate yourself to it for a bit of time. It doesn't need to take you all day. Another thing you don't need, and I've gotten at this in almost every other step that I've said, but you don't need a perfect knowledge of all cuts of meat. You know what? I didn't have time to slow down and watch a YouTube. I started to watch a couple different YouTube tutorials on butchering out deer, and I realized, okay, I have 2 hours. I have an hour and 51 minutes before I need to get in the shower, wash this smell of deer off of me, and get in the car and get to an appointment. I don't have time to follow a step-by-step, and so I just went for it. I don't have a perfect knowledge of every different cut of venison, and you don't need to have a perfect knowledge of that either. It's okay. If you're going into this with more enthusiasm than knowledge, make sure the meat is clean. Make sure it gets in the freezer right away. Those are the big things. All right, this one might be a little bit controversial, but I am going to say it. You do not need permission or approval from your family or friends to go pick up a fresh deer off the side of the road and put it in your freezer. I know that, you know, one reason that I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook these days is because there is so much judgment. There is just vile, angry, bullyish judgment in some of these homesteading groups. And I have seen a lot of people absolutely disparaged and seen horrible things said to people who want to stop and pick up roadkill and put it in their freezer. They look for advice in these forums, and there are these hunting snobs, I said it, snobs, who own a whole bunch of guns. And not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with being a fan of hunting and putting good, healthy meat in your freezer. I am a fan of that. What I'm not a fan of is stopping people from making use of good meat that is there by the side of the road, from making use of a life that has, you know, been killed and could feed their family with many pounds of meat. If you have been hated on in one of these forums on Facebook or some other online hangout, let me just tell you, you know what? Don't listen to it. There is absolutely no excuse for people to treat you that way. I have seen so many comments along the lines of, LOL, I wouldn't feed that to my dogs. Or, let me tell you, that is gonna be so bruised, it's like one big bruise. There's a reason people don't stop and pick that up. It's not worth your time. Don't listen to the haters. You know what, they're wrong, okay? If something gets hit by a semi-truck and it's completely obliterated, you know, that's one thing. But your average beautiful deer that probably got its neck broken as someone was stepping on their brakes is great meat. And if you get to it soon after that accident happened, you know what, good for you, good on you for feeding your family with that righteous meat. You know what, there is nothing wrong with that. Don't you be ashamed of it. You don't need anybody's permission. You don't need anybody's approval. You don't need it from people on Facebook, and you don't need it from your friends. You know, if you're getting hated on for doing something so smart and so wholesome for your family, it might be worth, you know, for me, seeing those kind of comments is part of why I reevaluated the spaces that I hang out in online. And, you know, this is going to be controversial as well, but I'm going to also say this. For some of you, you might be mothers, you might be women who are in charge of feeding your family well on very little. You may see roadkill by the side of the road and you might want to pick it up, and maybe you don't have permission to do that. Maybe you're in a marriage where it feels like you just can't do that because you've been told that you can't. And if you're in that situation, I get it. I was there for a long time myself, okay? I understand. I was you. I know everyone's situations are different. No judgment here, Mama. I hope things change for you, okay? I want you to know, if you've got tears in your eyes because you're wishing that you could do this, you're wishing you could stop by the side of the road, haul up that deer and put it in your freezer and feed your family with it, but you know that you can't without a fight that's not worth it. I'm really sorry. Okay, I get it. Let's talk about one other thing you don't need. You don't need specialty knives. They sell a lot of wonderful butchering knives online. Would I love to try them? Would I love to have them? Would I like to spend a couple $100s on really great knives? Maybe in another lifetime when I can, sure. you know what? My 22-year-old multi-purpose knife that happened to be sharp when this deer figuratively fell into my lap did fine. You know, you don't need to spend money that you don't have on amazing knives that get advertised in the fall. I mean, any time of year, but especially right now during hunting season, you're going to see things advertised that you don't need. And if you don't have it, that's fine. You know what? You'll do fine. Another thing you don't need, and this is something I've been asked a few times, I hadn't thought of it myself, but it's worth mentioning, at least here in Maine, no, you don't need a tag just on hand in your car ahead of time. You don't get the tag before you get the deer. You get the deer before you get the tag. Once you find that deer, then you make that phone call to Fish and Game and go from there, and someone will meet you with a tag. All right, questions, throw them down in the comments. I have a hunch I might get some comments on this one. I have had nothing but an amazing experience with deer, and you know, in the 10 days, actually just about 2 weeks since this happened, I've had a chance to chat with some of the other moms from our school. I was not the only mom who saw that beautiful deer by the side of the road, and I have had so much encouragement from my friends there at school who saw this deer and are nothing but thrilled that it is now in somebody's freezer, being enjoyed, and really enjoyed, because it's amazing meat. I don't think I've ever had such great venison, and honestly, it gives any grass-fed beef I've ever had a run for its money. So I've had an amazing experience with roadkill deer. I would love to hear about your experiences. Let me know in the comments below if you've got other positive, affirming, constructive comments for people who might be interested in this. Throw them down there in the comments. Keep it positive, my friends. Let's cheer each other on, not tear each other down. I love you, and I'm grateful for you, and I'm looking forward to making a lot more videos soon. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon. This is Anna with Salt in My Coffee. Bye.